Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison Select Reserve.
Hello everybody, welcome to Africa Prime. I'm Larry Midowo. She's got a famous surname. She grew up in Kenya hearing about a brother in America called Barry. He doesn't like that name. And she's now an accomplished humanitarian. She's written a book called And Then Life Happens. Dr. Auma Obama, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
The interesting thing is we come from the same village, yet we've never met.
There you have it.
Until now.
I had to write a book first to meet
You had to write a book for us to meet. The pleasure's all mine, by the way.
Mine too.
Tell us about those growing up years in Kenya. What were those like?
Very diverse, because initially I was born in the rural area, actually in a mission hospital in Gendia. Then we moved to live with my grandparents in Alego, the ancestral home of my family. And I lived there till I was 4 years old. And after that, because my father and mother separated, I went to live with my father in Nairobi. And I lived with him and his wife, who was an American woman, a white woman. So obviously that was a big change for me from the rural environment where we rural kids had never seen white people, and suddenly I was in a home where I was calling a white woman my mother, which was of course a big shock culturally.
Right.
But you know, as a 4-year-old, you adapt very quickly. I think in terms of the traditions and cultures, it was later as I was growing older, because we were a Luo family. As you know, you're also a Luo.
Yes.
And the role of the girl child is very defined. And I was the only girl in a family of boys. And I always was being told why I couldn't do this or that, or why I had to be a certain way or not. And what that did to me was that I kept questioning, you know, why is it because I'm a girl that I'm expected to be a certain way? And that really kind of impressed on who I became later on, and it was what drove me, because I know that from the age of 8 already I was challenging my grandmother,
Yes,
who was trying to kind of bring me up in that traditional way, because she was almost like the mother figure, since
Yes.
my mother was an American woman.
And
my
you say in the
stepmom.
book you call her Mama.
Yes, I call my grandmother Mama, because she was sort of like the mom, the African mom who took the place of my real mom.
And part of that culture, at least we come from, is the father figure is given such an important role. They have an almost overbearing impact on your life, and they make decisions for you. Who was Barack Obama Sr.?
Well, Barack Obama Sr. was a very imposing, very charismatic, larger-than-life person, especially for me as his child and as his daughter, because he was an intellectual, very academic, very academic, and actually a brilliant scholar. And all of these things I grew up knowing about, but at the same time, he was my father.
Right.
At the same time, he was the person who I was trying to relate with as, you know, an important member of my family. And it was sometimes challenging and difficult, and especially because as a girl, for his idea of who I was supposed to be, he also had that Luo traditional way of seeing things.
Yes.
Of you're a girl, you're supposed to behave a certain way. And I always questioned it. And I think for him, the biggest headache was me always asking why and why not. You know, and he was almost like, you should just conform, just behave,
Exactly,
stop
like everybody
questioning. And I questioned and questioned. I mean, all of my life, all of knowing him was questioning many situations that he would want me to be in and I would not want to be. But at the same time, he was also a very powerful influence, in the sense that his personality, in many ways we're similar, and also his personality drove me to greater things, I would say, because I always wanted to prove to him that I was more than just a girl. So I was driven by the fact that I wanted to show my father that I could do a lot of things that I felt that he didn't feel I could or I should.
And that independence and almost a rebellious streak meant you went to Germany without even telling him.
That is true. I disappeared, basically. And the interesting thing with that was because he was so dominant in my life, and because he was such a big personality, and not just in my life, but also he had a lot of influence in the country, I was of this impression that if I told him I was going away, he would stop me.
Yes.
Because it was my initiative. I looked for my scholarship myself. You know, I filled in the forms without letting him know. And I did everything all by myself because I really wanted to go. I wanted to get away from under that kind of like cultural constraint that I felt I was under. And the thing was that when I went to try and get my passport, I don't know if you know this, but I wasn't able to get a passport because I was told until the age of 21, you need your father's signature.
Yes, exactly.
And I went with my mom thinking, oh, that'll work, and it didn't work. They said, no,
You need
your
your father.
father's.
Yes.
And I'm like, why? And this, again, in keeping with my feeling around being a girl who is constantly being told what I can and can't do, I was like, wait a minute, how come I need it? You know, why is my mother not able
Yes.
to do it? Why doesn't she count? And it was a real juggle to finally get the passport, which I then did. It was kind of like a special concession to get it.
Right.
And I left without telling him. And he was very surprised that I was able to die. I think he was actually very hurt as well. I write about it in the book and how we reconcile that situation. But it was just this imposing character who I felt I couldn't oppose in a very obvious way.
And you learned a lot about independence, just being being on your own in Germany, because then you had to fend for yourself. You're fairly independent out of the scholarship. What did you do then? How did that shape who you are today?
I think the main thing about Germany, and that's why when people ask me about Germany, because Germany can be sometimes controversial, people expect me to say something like, oh, it was difficult, they were really horrible, they didn't like foreigners.
They were not?
They were not. And, you know, you have to kind of differentiate, because the main thing for me about Germany was that, first of all, it was this trying to get away from this situation where I was feeling very constrained as a girl, as a woman. And then moving into a space where suddenly it didn't matter that you're a girl and a woman. I went there in the 80s, where it was all about, you know, equal rights, it was all about women's rights. All this emancipation movement was really strong. It was at its peak. And there I was coming in, where before as a girl I was like almost not supposed to be heard, let alone be, well, I wasn't supposed to be heard, let alone be seen, not be seen, let alone be heard. And suddenly I was in a space where I could express myself. We would sit together with male students and women students and have conversations and discussions. And if you know the Germans, they really love to debate. You know, nobody gives in, so you're constantly debating. So my mind was being stimulated the whole time. And for my own identity, it was great because I suddenly mattered as a person and not as a woman. And I didn't have to justify being a woman to be intellectual, to be intelligent, to be able to express myself and have an opinion.
So there was a lot of awareness away from the classroom as much as it was inside the classroom.
Exactly. But that being said, on the other hand, I was confronted with the fact that I was an African woman. And there, the Germans had their prejudices or ideas or conceptions of what an African woman should be and what Africa is. And that was a challenge because they weren't surprised I wasn't wearing the traditional attire. I wasn't, you know, docile and complacent. I wasn't cooking fantastic hot chili meals and all these things. So it was again now trying to find a space to explain my identity just as being who I am now, the Auma that I am, that is not the familiar of the Germans in terms of looking at the stereotypes of Africans and in particular African women.
So you're a Dr. Auma Obama, so you actually did some reading as well. What did you study?
I did. In fact, I really enjoyed studying. There's an expression in German which is called, it's ewige Student, and that's really, in English I think the translation is that you're a professional student. I almost became that because I enjoyed studying so much and I studied so many different subjects that weren't necessarily related because at that time the German system and the German education system allowed that. So I definitely went the whole way with studying. I've done it all.
How did you reconcile with your father from the moment when you left without telling him? You write about this in the book, but just give us a quick highlight.
It was a very painful reconciliation because he actually came to look for me. And that was, I think, the first time that my father actually bowed to the fact that I was a woman, that I had grown up, and that he didn't have total control over my life because I had moved to Saarbrücken by then. I was studying, that's why I studied the language. It's really far. It's not like one of these spots where you're going to Heathrow or to Frankfurt. You actually have to take an extra flight to get there. It's a bit remote in terms of at that time. And he came to me. And one of the things was before he actually came, he had phoned me to ask me to go to him in Frankfurt, and I refused because I was afraid he could still send me back home. And I had this, as an African child, I was brought up knowing you have to obey your parents. You can't, you know, disagree with them and oppose them. And the retribution for that is some kind of punishment. And so I was afraid, but he came then to me. And it was also even more telling and more poignant because he didn't go to a hotel. I had him stay in in our residential hall, and he actually stayed in my little student room, and I shared a room with a friend. And in that space, we tried to talk, and I explained to him why I left without telling him my fears around the authoritarian kind of relationship we had, the fact of the disappointments around what happened to our family, how our family had deteriorated, and he tried to explain himself. And for the first time, I really saw my father as a vulnerable person and struggling and trying to cope with what had happened to his life. You know, from being a very successful man to having a family and struggling with cultural differences and tradition and the modern world and not being able to be a real family man and keep his family together. And that experience was the reconciliation. And it was a very kind of tentative reconciliation because he left and I felt he was a broken man, but I felt liberated, but not in a happy way because I really felt that I would have loved to embrace him more than I did, but I couldn't because there had been so many barriers between us due to the background that we had shared, the life that we had shared.
Not too long after that, unfortunately, he died in an accident, but also you got a letter from Barack Obama Junior.
Yes.
Which you said has a lot of, he had, even his handwriting was similar
Yes.
to your father's.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was amazing because, well, first of all, the sad thing is that I got to know my brother. I knew about him because my father always talked about him, was very proud of him, but I actually got to know him only after my father died. And that was because he was informed of the death of his father, and
Right.
he then looked for his family. And that's how we ended up communicating. And he sent this letter that I write about, and it was really quite kind of a goose pimple moment and a chilling moment because
Yes.
he has the same handwriting, he has the same name, and he also used the same paper that my father used to use to write to me, just by pure coincidence. So in opening before I even opened the letter, the first instinctive thought was, what is going on here? And then kind of think, okay, wait a minute, and then opening the letter and realizing it's my brother who's writing to me. And that's where we started the relationship and communicated with each other.
All right, stay with us because when we come back, I want you to talk about working on his campaign and if people ask you for favors all the time because you're called Obama. Africa Prime will be back in a moment.